Commissioner Caroline Pham, welcome to Hashed.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited to have you, and it's truly a privilege to have you here. So today, I have a few questions that I would like to learn more about your role and what CFT does. So I think the first question that I would like to start with you is how did you come about your role at CFTC, and what does CFTC do?
Sure. So first of all, I have to give my disclaimer that the views that I express today are just my own and don't represent that necessarily of the CFTC or of any other commissioner. So my role is as a commissioner of the CFTC. The CFTC is a bipartisan commission, the Commodities Futures Trading Commission. There are 5 members, 3 of which are from the president's majority party and 2 of which are from the minority party. And one of the 3 commissioners in the president's party is designated as the chairman. So we are the heads of the agency, and we have to vote to take any agency action. So I think 2 of the most important parts of my job is making good decisions, whether it's a rule or a proposal, whether it's an enforcement action or other matters that come to me for a vote. And then the second part of my job, which I think is really critical, is to engage with the public and to provide a voice for members of the industry and other people with interests and concerns, particularly public interest groups and customer protection groups, that they have a voice into what the CFTC does.
Great. And I think the point about being able to protect the public, I think you've exhibited that quite well during the financial crisis, and I think the resulting product of the Dodd-Frank Act. Could you talk about your role in the Dodd-Frank Act and how it came to be, and what does it do, and how does it prolong the mission that you have at the CFTC?
Sure, I'll tell you a little bit about the history of the CFTC. So the CFTC was first created because of the need to have a market oversight regulator over the agricultural commodity derivatives markets. So futures on wheat, corn, soybeans, pork bellies, all of these different types of agricultural commodities, and they wanted to have someone to make sure that the markets were fair and free. So over time, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission evolved in ways increasing its scope, its size, and its importance, and also the markets that it oversaw. So in 1974 is when Congress passed the Commodity Futures Trading Commission Act, which created the CFTC as it is in its current form. And so in its modern form, the CFTC had its first chairman sworn in 1975. What the Dodd-Frank Act did was really dramatically expanded the jurisdiction of the CFTC over at that time, the 700 trillion notional swaps market, and it's a global market. And so the CFTC had that expansion of its authorities. And so I think what people don't realize is even though the CFTC has agricultural roots, it is a regulator with global jurisdiction over the most complex products out there in the marketplace and over the largest market participants, which includes not only U.S. and non-U.S. banks, but also U.S. and non-U.S. exchanges and clearinghouses.
Great. And I think as you've rightly pointed out, that CFTC really has an expansive role and jurisdiction over a variety of assets. And I think this is kind of a really nice segue into the role that CFTC has been playing in the digital assets market as early as 2015. Could you talk about how you became interested in digital assets, and what have you done in terms of your jurisdiction over digital assets?
So one story that I think people don't realize so much is that I actually first became interested and started looking at crypto in 2013.
Wow.
At that time, I was at the CFTC as counsel to Commissioner Scott Amalia, and the Bitcoin Foundation came in and was basically trying to figure out if the CFTC regulated Bitcoin. And what struck me about that time is when we looked at it, we essentially thought, well, Bitcoin is something that looks like it's worth something, so like a store of value, and it also seems to be a way of transferring value, like a means of exchange. And even though here we are, almost 10 years later, it's still the same framework that we really use, the same lens that we use to look at Bitcoin and all of the other crypto assets that have developed since then. So these principles and this way of looking at it, I think, though, always comes back to the fact that no matter what type of asset it is, when you look at it from a trading and markets perspective, it has to adhere to the same core principles. And that's, what I like to say is a pretty common sense approach. Don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal, be responsible. And so the CFTC is well experienced in creating a regulatory framework that, true to our mission, promotes responsible innovation as well as fair competition. And so I think that's why, especially with our flexible principles-based approach that is more technology neutral, that's why I think we're well suited to keep up with the new risks and issues presented by the crypto sector.
Okay. And if you want to bring crypto assets into kind of the center of the attention from the CFTC's perspective, what are some of the necessary improvements that you are seeking personally, but also on behalf of the Commission, both domestically in the US and internationally?
So I think in order to really foster what I call responsible digital asset markets, it's very important for us to engage not only with the public, but also with the experts in the industry who best understand the markets and the technology and the potential opportunities, but as well as the challenges. So one of the things that I've done is I've outlined 10 fundamentals for responsible digital asset markets, which I think will look very familiar to many responsible actors that are out there in the markets, no matter what asset class it is, whether it's equities, fixed income, rates, currencies, or digital assets. So I think that's one important place to start. The other thing that I think is important is to, like I said, engage with the public and the experts. And so one way that I am looking to facilitate that is through my Global Markets Advisory Committee, which I sponsor, and which I believe is best suited to address the issues involved with making sure that there's a level playing field for global businesses and global markets. So through that, I'm looking at creating a subcommittee on digital asset markets where we can really harness all of the brain power and the resources that are out there to come up with good policy recommendations, working with the private sector together with the public sector. And hopefully these policy recommendations can become rules or can be used to inform international standards.
I've read about your Global Markets Initiative, and I think it's a great initiative. And I think part of it is because the digital assets themselves are global by nature. So I think you really do need an open-minded regulator who's not only looking at it from a domestic perspective, but also as a global perspective. So I really think it's a great initiative, and best of luck with that initiative. So in continuation, I think there have been a lot of conversations around your recent press about regulation by enforcement. Could you tell us how that word came to be, and what does that mean for you, and what do you think CFTC can do perhaps better than other agencies?
Sure. So I'm not sure where that phrase originally came from, but it's been around for a very long time. And the way I think about it is, in the United States, and this is recognized in our Administrative Procedure Act, which is the way through which administrative agencies like the CFTC can promulgate new rules and obligations for the public. So there's two ways to make rules. One way is through what's called rulemaking by adjudication. Rulemaking by adjudication is essentially enforcement actions that are brought in a litigation type context. And those decisions and opinions have the force of law. So that's, one could call that regulation by enforcement. The other way that you can make new rules is through what we call notice and comment rulemaking, which essentially requires public consultation. So the agency creates a proposed rule, publishes it, and takes in comments from the public. Anybody in the public can submit a comment. And then after thorough and deliberate consideration, then the agency can promulgate a final rule. And then that's the rules that have the force of law. So there's two ways to do it. I myself prefer the latter route because I think it's very important, again, the United States as a representative democracy makes sure that the people have a voice in what the government is doing.
That's really important, I think. It's because when you come up with a new regulation, I think there needs to be public consultation, especially some input from industry players, academics, experts, and then you have a chance to be part of the rulemaking process. And I think essentially that's what you're proposing and that's what you're embracing compared to perhaps another regulator. So thank you for that. I think the next question that I would like to ask then is, in terms of some of the proposed bills that the Congress is entertaining at the moment, what are some of the proposed bills that are circulating out there, and what do they say about CFTC's role within them?
So what I really appreciate about the various legislative proposals in the United States, so one of which is the Lummis-Gillibrand bill, which is a holistic and very comprehensive approach to regulating digital assets in the United States. But there's other proposals, including the just announced Senate Agriculture Committee bill, the Digital Commodities Consumer Protection Act, sponsored by Chairwoman Stabenow and Senator John Boozman. There's a similar bill that was previously proposed by the House Agriculture Committee. That's the Digital Commodity Exchange Act. But what all of these bills have in common is that they recognize the CFTC's current and appropriate role as having oversight over digital commodities. We have already said back in 2015 that Bitcoin is a commodity, a virtual currency subject to the CFTC's jurisdiction. And since that time, we have identified other tokens which we have said we have jurisdiction over. That includes Ether, but it also includes Litecoin, Dogecoin, and other tokens as well. So I think it's great that these legislative proposals make it very clear as to the CFTC's jurisdiction here, and make it very clear the CFTC's ability to require registration and licensing and regulatory requirements that ensure that the right protections are in place for both the markets as well as for customers. Things like minimum financial resource requirements, risk management standards, disclosures, customer protections, conflict of interest protections. All of these things are very critical to make sure that we have safe markets that work for everybody.
Great. And if these bills, or one of the bills, if they do pass and CFTC gets this jurisdiction over digital assets, would you think that this is advantageous to the industry or not?
Well, we are a tough regulator, so anybody who thinks that they're getting off easy with us might have missed the fact that we just filed an enforcement action for $1.7 billion over a Bitcoin Ponzi scheme, which I think also shows our global reach, because some of that did involve other countries outside the United States. So that's one thing I want people to be really clear and to understand. We've brought over 50 enforcement actions since 2015 with penalties in the hundreds of millions of dollars. But I think what is well suited with the CFTC's approach, and which makes us built to regulate innovation, is because right there in our mandate and in our mission it says that we are to promote responsible innovation and fair competition. And I think that with our principles-based approach, that means that we can anticipate and adapt to new risks and new issues more quickly. We can harness the power of the industry to come up with solutions in order to address potential issues in our markets. And most of all, it's a balanced approach, which also has a pragmatic way of looking at dealing with any potential issue that might come up. So that is where I think, because we engage with the industry and we engage with the public and we make it their responsibility as well as ours to police the markets and to make sure that we have safe markets that work for everybody. I think people appreciate that they do have a voice.
I certainly agree with that. CFTC is a tough regulator, but at the same time, I think a sensible one, and especially because you are encouraging public consultation and the inclusion of that voice. I think I have been arguing for clear regulation from the beginning, and I think there are enough good actors out there who want to do that, but that clarity hasn't necessarily come through. So I really hope that you are able to be the beacon of light for the industry, so that we bring everything to the light.
Thank you. I always say it's about first principles, and that's clear rules of the road. People can't build and grow compliant digital asset markets without knowing what are the rules of the road.
I completely agree with that, so thank you. So you are obviously in South Korea. Is this your first time visit? And can you tell us a little bit why you decided to come to South Korea for the Korea Blockchain Week 2022?
Yes, thank you. So it is my first time in Seoul. It's very exciting. It's not my first time in Asia Pacific, but one of the things that has always really impressed me and has been one of the reasons why I really enjoy the opportunities to come out to Asia Pacific is because of the tremendous energy out here and the growth. You know, there's so many opportunities, there's so much growth, as well as just an openness, I think. There is a mindset that is a growth mindset that is focused on innovation and adoption of new technologies. But it's not one that's just rushing into something new without thinking about all of the different issues. I just think it's more of a willingness to embrace new advancements. And that kind of forward-looking approach is something that really appeals to me, and it speaks to me. So that's one of the reasons why I love being here. And I really like to connect with and to understand that, you know, where you have such a tremendous technology sector, one where you do have sort of mass adoption, and particularly with some of the developments in gaming, in Web3, and you know, Internet of Things and beyond. That's why it's very exciting for me to be here in Seoul.
Well, we are certainly honored to have you here. So I would like to end this interview with one last question, which is at Hashed, we try to be a very standard-setting VC that's promoting good actors and responsible innovation. So in your opinion, what do responsible VCs and portfolio companies, what do they look like within the industry?
So I think this again goes back to what is a really common sense approach also. It is don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal, and be responsible. And there are just a wealth of information out there on best practices. I think for those startups that, even though they're in crypto, they might not just be a tech company. They may actually be a financial institution or financial services company. So I think it's very important to really understand the activity that you're engaged in, and to understand if it does become financial services activity, which then is subject to pretty strict requirements, given that you are handling people's money. But the basics for being responsible are very similar across the board. So it's having a very strong risk management program. Understand the risks that you're getting yourself into and have a way of managing those risks and mitigating them. What controls do you have in place? Having a compliance program. Having policies and procedures, having protections against conflicts of interest to make sure that the incentives are aligned. So I think this comes back to having a really strong management team, and one who really takes ownership of the business and has accountability. So I don't know that it's anything different from what any of our parents would have told us, but I think it helps to just keep that in mind. Am I doing the right thing? Is this the right thing for my clients, my customers, my communities? Is it the right thing for the markets? Is it the right thing for the ecosystem? And I think if you stop and ask yourself those questions, then it may not be as hard as people think.
I think that's really wise, not only for the industry, but also as a human being who wants to good. So thank you for your wisdom. It's been about 4 months into your commissionership, and I know that you have about 5 more years for your tenure. I wish you the best, and given what you've achieved in the past 4 months, I cannot wait to see what you do in the next 4. So congratulations, and thank you for joining us once again.
Thank you so much. It's an honor.
Great.